He said, I want to have dinner with you. That's just that little statement. Can you imagine? I've imagined Zacchaeus and what he looked like before and thought about the story a bunch of times. And I always imagined just this big, like, cake-eating grin. Just because he wanted to have dinner. You want to have dinner with me? How important did that make him feel? Probably was nervous. Why does he want to have dinner with me? But at the same time, he wants to have dinner with me. He wants to be at my house tonight. And that one act of love that Jesus showed, that wee little man, opened up his heart, and there came out of him rivers of mercy. As he said, you know what? If I've stolen anything from anybody, I'm going to give it back. If I've done anyone wrong, I'm going to fix it. I repent of my sin, and I know it is great. But I'm going to change my life today. Why? Because Jesus took the time to love him, even though he was a little different than the norm. Last one, and again, I said I had 4 stories I wanted to mention. I keep bringing these stories up because to me they're so important, and it just keeps showing the character of Christ, the character of Christ, the character of Christ. The last one is my absolute favorite, and I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but please turn to John chapter 8. John chapter 8. It actually begins in verse 53 of chapter 7 and goes on. And you'll notice the little brackets there. It's dealing with a textual discrepancy of how it's written. But regardless of that, the story is still very important. It says, they went each to his own house, but then Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. So what do you say? Why are they asking Jesus that question? Why? Where does Jesus have any authority at all over that in that day and time? This is why they asked Jesus that question. They were trying to catch him to get him in trouble. Because if Jesus would have said, don't stone her, they would have said, he's against the law of Moses. Stone him with her. But if Jesus would have said, yeah, kill her, I don't care. Everybody who's been hearing him talk about love and compassion and all those things and forgiveness would have said, oh, he's a hypocrite now. So they thought they had Jesus right where they wanted him. They thought they had Jesus right where they could get him in trouble. And it says that in verse 6, that they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Again, picture the scene. Here's the Pharisees. They come to bring this woman. They throw her down at Jesus' feet. And they say, Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. What would you have us do with her? And Jesus ignores them and starts doodling on the ground. And you can imagine a self-righteous Pharisee, hey boy, we didn't come to watch you doodle in the dirt. You better answer us. And Jesus stands up. And he said, any one of you who is perfect, please feel free to cast the first stone. And then he goes back to writing in the dirt. He never says what he was writing. I've often said he was writing the names of their girlfriends, but that's, no, we don't know that. But he's writing in the dirt. There's another way of looking at it. You could just say he was trying to show just how much he was not concerned about them and how much he was concerned about her. Because when he's writing in the dirt, he's not paying them any attention. One by one they walk away, and then as soon as the last one goes away, what does he do? The text tells us. It says, but when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Who has condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more. That's the key. Is that Jesus was willing at that moment to say, you know what? You are a sinner, and you've been caught in sin, and you've been caught red-handed, and they're ready to kill you. But I stand ready to forgive you. Society has cast you out, but I will welcome you in. All four stories have commonalities, and that's the 4 points for today. All four stories share 4 commonalities. The first thing is, all of them had a problem with sin in some area. The second thing is, all were outcasts of civilized society. The third thing, all were excluded from the religious crowds. And the fourth thing, all were in some way in need of love. And if you look at the story of Jesus, you'll notice how He responded to each one. Number 1, He loved them all. Number 2, He was patient with them all. And number 3, He engaged them all, even though they were not like Him. And that's the greatest truth of all, is that though these people were not like Him, Jesus was willing to step outside of Himself and be with them. And the problem that I see, not just in this church, in my own heart, and the problem I see in the hearts of many Christians today, is that we have chosen that we expect people to be like us before we will reach out to them. And as long as we do that, as long as we expect people to be good or righteous or like us before we'll reach out to them, we will not be winning the world for Christ. We have got to get to the place where we are willing to speak to people who are different than us, where we are willing to try to reach out to people who are different than us. Are there not people in our lives that we intentionally avoid? What about a person who is an overt, flaming, effeminate male homosexual? Would you be willing to sit and have a conversation with that person and love that person, or would they be so just distasteful to you that you couldn't imagine having that conversation? What about a pregnant teenager who is promiscuous and just seems like, boy, I don't really want to have anything to do with her? What about a person who is homeless, smells like they haven't bathed in a month and probably haven't? The point is simple, and I'm sure you all understand by now the point of the message and what has changed me in having read that book and read these passages and really applied them to my life, is that Christians are like Jonah when we need to be like Jesus. Jonah was willing to run as far as he could away from God because God asked him to witness to a group of people he didn't like. And instead of just going ahead and witnessing to those people like God told him to, he ran as far as he could away. Instead of just going and doing what God told him to. And things didn't work out too great for Jonah, by the way. He got the submarine ride, brought him right back. But so if you are running from God in this, if God has got you in a situation where you ought to be witnessing to somebody, rather than trying to find that ship to Tarshish that Jonah found, why not just take the route of Christ and reach down and start loving these people? Why not open your heart to somebody who's a little bit different than you? Not so that they can become like you, but maybe they can become like Christ And in doing so, you'll be more like Christ as well.